You read that title right. I regret watching RWBY Ice Queendom, but before I tell you why, let me give you a little bit of my background with this series in general. I started watching RWBY in 2019, right before Volume 7 started airing, and then I watched Volume 7 and 8, and they weren't great, and then I saw this new anime, and I thought, this is a new direction for RWBY, this is something new, and it's going to be good, and then it wasn't good. Honestly, the best part of RWBY for me was making this podcast, because if it weren't for RWBY Volume 7, this podcast probably wouldn't even exist. So thank you, Rooster Teeth, for that, I guess. Now, earlier this year, I made a video about the RWBY Ice Queendom anime and kind of gave my first impressions on it, and I wasn't overly enthusiastic about it, but I did say that I was going to hold off any judgment until I had seen the full series. Because while the animation in the trailer looks great, and obviously the voice acting is great, and, it looks great, and on paper seems like a good idea, but I don't know if I like the execution. And, overall, obviously, I can't judge anything until the full series comes out later this year, and then we'll go from there and see if it really is just a reboot cash grab, or if it's more of a genuine, we're gonna do a RWBY anime. So, now that the anime has concluded and I've watched all of it, let's talk about the mediocre mess that is RWBY Ice Queendom. Now, unfortunately, this anime struggles with a lot of the same issues that I have with the main series, which is poor character writing, poorly explained powers, and quite frankly, really terrible pacing. But before I jump headfirst into all of those negatives, let me tell you about the couple positives that I found. And when I say couple, I mean literally the two positives that I have. My first positive is that there are a lot of iconic scenes and moments that got reanimated in this 2D style, which I'll talk about the animation in a minute, but if you are a big fan of someone like Penny or Sun or any of the other characters that got brought back, this could be a really big positive for you, and as someone who really enjoyed RWBY Volume 1 through 3, that was a positive for me. Now, as I mentioned just a second ago, another positive for me is the animation. Now, Shaft really understood the assignment when they were told, make the cute anime girls do epic action anime things, and that is exactly what they did. Shaft really put their all into a lot of those fights, especially the fight against the Nevermore, the food fight at the end, and even the Weiss training arc thing at the beginning. There were also a lot of really good cuts during the final battle in the Dream World, my personal favorite being when Yang is riding on her motorcycle and fighting the giant Golden Nicholas mech thing. The animation during that fight was insane and really kind of made up for the lack of fight animation that was present throughout kind of the middle of the series, but I'll talk about that in a second. Now, on to the negatives, which I do have plenty of those, so sit back, grab your popcorn, and listen to me ramble about how bad this show is. Now, the first thing that really bothered me and I had an issue with was the pacing, especially in the first 3 episodes. I felt like I was getting this weird whiplash when it went from the beginning of Volume 1 to nearly halfway through Volume 2 in the span of these first 3 episodes. And it felt like they did this so that they can introduce characters like Penny and Sun without having to make a new reason as to why they would be there this early in the series, but then don't ever give those 2 characters anything to do, which makes it feel really weird that they sped up the pacing to introduce them. Now, granted, I watched all 3 episodes back to back when they were condensed down to one hour episode on Crunchyroll, so maybe that's fixed when they released them individually, but I don't think that's the case. Now, post episode 3, the pacing slows right back down, and it honestly slows down to a snail's pace that made it really boring and uninteresting to watch until about episode 9 or 10 when things started to pick back up. Speaking of post-episode 3, Team Juniper, who seemed like they were supposed to play a really big role in this, don't really do anything post-episode 3. Except for Jean. He does stuff, I guess. But Pyrrha, Ren, and Nora are relegated to these side roles when they had such a bigger role and presence in the main series, and maybe that was supposed to be expanded upon and just got cut out, I don't know, but it just feels weird that they were supposedly supposed to play a bigger role and then didn't. Especially a character like Pyrrha, who's unfortunately been dead in the main series for years and fans want to see more from her character, and then she's just kind of there for fan service, I guess? Well, I can't argue she does nothing in the dream world. She stands there with the little mini Weisses and shoots beams once or twice, but other than that, she really does nothing. And piggybacking off of the fan service, that's another problem I have with Penny and Sun, is it feels like they were put there for fan service, which you should never just do anything solely for fan service. The only thing substantial that Penny and Sun do is they have a conversation with their respective characters in the first bit of the season, and then about halfway through they have a meaningful pep talk and then never show up again or contribute anything to the plot. Now, aside from those things, the dream world itself was just really confusing, and maybe that's because there was a lot of time between episode 3 and when I watched episode 4, but it felt so confusing, and the powers of the professor that could send people into the dream world was confusing, and the coins were never properly explained what they can and can't do. The rules with the nightmares were very loose and unexplained, and this just goes back to what I said about the poorly explained powers. Don't get me wrong, semblances and auras are a very cool concept, but when you don't take the time to fully explain how it works, you end up with people like me who are just confused and disinterested, I guess, in what is actually going on. The only reason I really kept watching was because Weiss is my favorite character and she can do no wrong and I'll stand by everything that she ever does, so that's what kept me in, but if it weren't for her, I would have dropped this series after episode 3. Now, we're down to my last few negatives here, but one of them is that it feels like Shaft kind of forgot to animate part of the season. Like, don't get me wrong, the animation is great and Shaft did a good job, but there were just some fights in the middle that felt like they didn't get as much priority as some of the other ones, which I know that's kind of how the pipeline works, but it just felt weird because there was a fight between Negative Weiss and Negative Blake where part of the fight was literally concealed behind a building and you could only hear the swords clashing, which that in and of itself was incredibly off-putting to me because it's a cool fight and I want to see it, not look at the rooftop of a building. It does kind of feel like Shaft really put all of their time and effort into the fights at the beginning before they go into the dream world to really wow and capture you so that you watch up to episode 10 when the fighting gets really good again. And they really did go all out on that food fight at the end. Like, you did not have to go so hard, but you did. And it was good. Just, you did not have to go that hard. This series also feels oddly similar to Persona 5, which, if you've played Persona 5, you know exactly what I'm talking about in the sense of, oh no, we're gonna go into your evil mind palace to fight the evil version of you to turn you back to normal in the real world and kick out the distorted desires that are taking over. But inside of this palace, we have all kinds of different versions of ourselves that is how you see us instead of how we really are, and it's that distorted perception of reality that we're going into to save you. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say Persona 5 in and of itself is an entirely original concept. You could argue they got personas based off of stands from JoJo's, but that's not the point I'm trying to make. The problem is that RWBY feels too similar to Persona 5 in kind of like that meme where it's like, hey, can I copy your homework? Yeah, sure. Just make sure you change a little bit so that the teacher doesn't notice. Except Rooster Teeth didn't change enough and the teacher definitely noticed. But hey, if you haven't played Persona 5, then it doesn't really matter to you because you can't see the similarities anyway. It's just, for me, someone who's played Persona 5, I can see the differences and it kind of bothered me how similar it was. Now, my biggest negative with the show, and the one that I really don't want to be true, is that this feels like a soulless cash grab from Rooster Teeth. Not only that, but it feels like they're just trying to sweep under the rug how bad and declining quality the main RWBY series has been, and I don't think that's fair. Now, it doesn't surprise me given that it's come from Rooster Teeth, and they do this kind of stuff all the time, and they just kind of wanted to make the RWBY fans happy with something that was supposed to be good, and then it ended up with this almost half-baked project. And when I say half-baked, I don't mean in terms of animation quality, I mean in terms of story. Like, the story was just not great. And while the series as a whole isn't great, I still have an immense amount of respect for the people who put in the time and effort and work to make this series as best as they possibly could, from the voice actors to the animators to even the writers and directors. And don't take me bringing up the negative aspects of this show to berate their work or belittle any of the work they do. I mean no ill will towards them, I just cannot ignore the negative aspects of this show. Now, I sincerely hope Rooster Teeth can kind of turn this metaphorical ship around with RWBY and bring it up to its full potential, because it is a really good concept and a really good idea that Monty created. It's just being so mismanaged and mishandled right now. If you found enjoyment in this series, then more power to you. I am glad that you could sit back and just have something to enjoy. And if RWBY is your favorite show, I'm glad there was more content for you to enjoy. It just didn't really do it for me. That being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. I am going to try to do more like this, reviewing shows that we don't necessarily get to talk about on the podcast. So if you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Now, you can also watch whatever video goes right here next to me. You can watch it. It's probably a really cool thumbnail, probably a really good video considering it's on this YouTube channel. All of our videos are great. So you can watch that. I hope you enjoy it. If you're still here listening to me, go watch the video. Don't stay here. This video is over. Go watch that video.